Hello, bonjour, and ahoy. On Tuesday evening, we hosted the GLOBSEC award ceremony at the Bratislava Castle, where we awarded the annual Czech and Slovak Transatlantic Award to both General John Allen and Václav Havel in memoriam. And here are the highlights from day 2. We kicked off the day on the main stage, hearing from the Foreign Affairs Minister of Slovakia and Austria, as well as the Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister of Italy on how to strengthen Europe's role on the international stage. Staying on the subject of European diplomacy, we heard from the Foreign Affairs Minister of Croatia, North Macedonia, and Slovenia on their respective trajectories towards achieving an ever greater European integration. This was followed by a lively discussion among foreign affairs ministers of the Visegrad Four, which included Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Mayors from Bratislava and Budapest, as well as a voice from the Czech Republic, discussed the reactions of cities to the pandemic and the need to improve communications with government and generate more capacity in times of crisis. With the meeting between Biden and Putin taking place, experts from Russia, the EU, and North America speculated on the potential outcomes and what to look for. Finally, we ended the day by hearing from renowned thinker Francis Fukuyama about the need to rebuild the foundations of democracy and trust throughout societies. Our list of international expert and renowned thinkers is far from over, so stay tuned for more video highlights and recaps.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the last day at GLOBSEC 2021, Julia Belus.
Hello, everyone. So welcome to this session, and a very warm welcome to the panelists who are coming in from all over, I guess, Europe and the UK. My name is Julia Belus. I'm a senior health correspondent at Vox, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I think we're talking about one of the most important issues of the pandemic, how to build trust in vaccines in an environment where it's kind of exceptionally difficult to know who or what to trust. Not only do we have this kind of onslaught of information and scientific knowledge coming at us at all times, but we also have to deal with bad actors who are spreading misinformation and disinformation. And so the focus today is on how to fight information insecurity, and we have a distinguished panel to help us. So I'll start with the person who's joining us from beautiful Bratislava. Miroslava Saviris is the Senior Research Fellow in the Democracy and Resilience Program in the GLOBSEC Policy Institute here in Bratislava. We also have Henry Cullis, who's joining us from London. He is the Deputy Director of National Security Communications in the UK Cabinet Office, where he co-leads cross-government planning and delivery of communication activity to achieve the UK's national security objectives. We also have Melinda Frost, who's joining us from Geneva and the World Health Organization. She's the leader of the Translate Science team and working on the Infodemic management COVID-19 response at WHO. And so today, like the Infodemic, we have questions coming at us from all angles. So people will be submitting questions via Zoom, via the GLOBSEC app. And of course, for everyone in the room, you can stand up or raise your hand when you have a question and go to the microphone there when you're called on. And so I think the best way to start the panel today is to kind of give a sense to the audience of the problem, the scale of the problem. And I thought from your various vantage points, we could talk about how the misinformation or disinformation campaigns you're tracking are affecting the vaccine rollout. And maybe we could start with Miroslava.
Thank you very much, Julia, also for this kind introduction. So when we speak about the infodemic and disinformation affecting vaccine rollout, I think the obvious answer would be that yes, obviously disinformation does affect rollout of the vaccination, but then we also can't make sweeping generalizations. I think it's much better in some countries, some countries where obviously conspiracy theories about COVID-19 are not so prominent, such as, for example, in Austria. There, according to our GLOBSEC Trends 2021 data, we see that actually the disinformation campaigns do not have such an effect because the vaccination rollout there is more successful than in other CEE countries, such as, for example, Romania or Bulgaria, where you have quite large prominence of some COVID-19 related conspiracy theories. So we do see this link between conspiracy theories about COVID-19 or disinformation and vaccination rollout. But also, I would like to just stress or point out that when we speak about disinformation and conspiracy theories, we often imagine, the trolls in St. Petersburg spreading disinformation, which is absolutely true. This has been part of rollout of some vaccines where really target of strong disinformation campaigns or information operations seeking to discredit some of these vaccines, particularly the AstraZeneca vaccine. But in the information chaos that is the infodemic, we have also seen that public figures have sometimes wittingly or unwittingly provided incorrect information to the public. We can mention, the former President Donald Trump and his advice to general populations on how to treat COVID-19, which was factually incorrect, or even sometimes I think mainstream media have in some cases struggled a bit with reporting on the vaccination. For example, in Slovakia, we had a case where basically on a primetime TV at 8 p.m. when, the whole, let's say, nation watches TV in the evening, we had this one case of a woman dying shortly after receiving jab from AstraZeneca vaccine. And this report basically made a direct link between this jab and between the resulting death of this lady. Later on, it was discovered that the death was not related to the vaccine, and that also, the reporter who was basically responsible for producing the story was her relative. So there was obviously some kind of a bias involved as well. But, the damage has been done. And then when you have these kind of stories promulgated in the information space, it's very difficult for anybody to really navigate what is true and what isn't true anymore. So
right. And I'd love to bring in Melinda in Geneva, who has kind of this global overview, because you're seeing, that it's not just, it's not even just, online or public figures. There's also this world of offline and impenetrable networks of disinformation being spread.
Right. Thank you, Julia. And I completely agree with the things that Miroslava had mentioned as well, that it's a pretty complicated issue, particularly when it comes to vaccines. We've always known that communicating vaccines, even during non-emergencies and rolling out new vaccines, can introduce a lot of concerns and questions, and valid questions on the part of a population. But now during COVID-19, when you pull in the mix of changing science, imminent threat to some individuals, concern, and things are just changing, so there's a lot of uncertainty. People have questions and concerns. So this is sort of a ripe field for mis and disinformation. And I'm really excited to see that we have a session on focused on infodemics. This is something that the World Health Organization has really pushed the envelope on. We started an infodemics management pillar as part of the COVID-19 response at the very beginning, within the first month of the response in 2020. So this has been an area of focus for us. So we've been trying to track misinformation and disinformation and really learn more about how to respond to that in order to address people's concerns. What we see a lot when it comes to disinformation is, or during any emergency, is essentially that people will sort of revert back to the information sources that they trust. Those may be individuals, they may be mass media, traditional media, they may be social media. And then I think what we found too during COVID-19, particularly as countries begin to do lockdowns too, people were turning a little bit more towards social media. And as people were uncertain and more stressed because of the situation of COVID-19, they sought more information to relieve that stress. And yet what we think, and what studies are beginning to show, is that actually caused more stress because there were more confusions, particularly when they were trying to seek information with online sources. So WHO is doing quite a bit of work around this to figure out more about how to track misinformation, disinformation, learn more about how we combat that and how we can respond to that to decrease that conversation online, and how to pre-bunk, how to get information, good information out before disinformation and misinformation has a chance to really grow within the information ecosphere. So a lot of work going on around this, and I'm glad we're talking about vaccines today. This is the most important issue right now. But just to say too, we've been tracking mis and disinformation just in the COVID-19 response too, in terms of cures or prevention methods. So this has been something we've been doing again for about 18 months, and we're learning quite a bit. And I can talk maybe a little bit later in the program about what the future holds for WHO and Infodemics.
Thank you, Melinda. And Harry, can you give us the view from London?
Yes, of course. I think it's important to sort of draw out a couple of the things that my esteemed fellow panelists mentioned. And in particular, it's this underlying issue of trust. And I think it's important to acknowledge that disinformation doesn't create divisions or create these kind of beliefs, but what it does is land in an environment where it exacerbates them, and it really different actors with different motivations really try to exploit that for their own purposes. And when we're looking at the issue here, I think it does come down to trust, but we need to disaggregate exactly what that trust is in. Trust in this context is not just about trust in the product, i.e. the vaccine, but it's also very much about trust in the institutions that are developing, supplying, and administering the vaccine, and belief that those institutions have public interest and interest of different groups at heart. And of course, this is all happening in a context that I know GLOBSEC's discussed at length in previous years, which is a general trend of declining trust in government institutions worldwide. And that's sort of widely highlighted in a number of surveys, but notably, of course, the Edelman Trust Barometer. So we need to make sure that we are working in a way that understands exactly how we can overcome those barriers with different groups. And I think about the challenge here as being one of supply and demand for accurate information. And when it comes to how we use strategic communications, part of what we need to do is to actually create demand for accurate information. And there are a number of campaigns and activities that the UK has developed and worked on with our partners to help nudge populations to seek out accurate information, but also to be able to detect inaccurate information. And then, of course, on the supply side, it's a case of ensuring that accurate information is brought to those audiences in a way that they find trustful. Domestically in the UK, we're lucky enough to enjoy sort of high levels of vaccine confidence overall, with over 70% of the UK population saying they would accept the vaccine. And of course, when you look at how the vaccine hesitant population actually breaks out according to different demographic categories, you'll find that that's significantly higher in certain groups. So it's a case of finding the trusted messengers that we can bring them accurate information with. So The view from the UK domestically, I think, is that, you know, we are lucky enough to enjoy relatively overall high levels of vaccine confidence, and we're working to find the best way to encourage confidence among those other groups, whilst also recognizing that we can work with our partners around the world to use strategic communications to boost vaccine confidence in a number of different ways, including through working with the World Health Organization.
And Henry, you mentioned trusted messengers, and I'm curious where you've seen the most success. Like I remember there was a great campaign, was it Elton John you had advocating for getting the jab, and you've kind of drawn on, to everything from celebrities to obviously, other public leaders. So I'm curious what you've seen are particularly successful campaigns or messengers. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. No, celebrities are great, and particularly when you're thinking about, you know, appealing to finding individuals that resonate with specific audiences, and they have quite broad appeal. And when we think about youth audiences, of course, it's a great way to engage them because, you know, they're not going to be necessarily listening to mainstream news, and they don't want to hear from politicians. So you can find people that, you know, sports stars, musicians that they really that they already follow on social media, and they're going to pick up that content just through their routine sort of information consumption activity. But I think the most important ones aren't the high profile ones, and it's actually bringing the messaging down to as local a level as possible, and finding individuals that are influential with specific communities, like religious leaders, health professionals. So just anecdotally, as I walk out of my stairwell in my building in the morning, and I live in a central area of London, very diverse communities. And so there's an image of an imam who works in the local community talking about his confidence in the vaccine on a poster in the stairwell. And it's, you know, bringing these very local voices that are recognized in small communities to the fore that is essential to build trust.
I imagine that's a challenge for an organization like the WHO that's working globally. Like when just covering this issue over a decade, you see how even making generalizations about vaccine hesitancy in a country are difficult because it's so, these pockets of refusal tend to be pockets like extremely local and with very specific community-based concerns.
No. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think from the World Health Organization at the global level, every time we communicate anything, we have to think, who are we communicating to now? Is it the 15-year-old in Kenya? Is it the 75-year-old grandmother in Costa Rica? We have a huge audience. And so it does, and I think Miroslava mentioned this earlier too, just vaccine hesitancy in particular is a very, very nuanced issue. Somebody's questioning of a vaccine could be very valid. I think a lot of what we're seeing actually in Europe right now isn't so much people questioning the vaccine, although there is some of that. It's people's ease of access to get to the vaccine. It's not as easy in some locations to get it as it is others. But just to touch on what Henry was mentioning in terms of trusted sources of information, this is something that the WHO has been working on, and even prior to COVID-19, we started a network called the WHO Information Network for Epidemics, and the sole purpose of this network, we call it EpiWin, was to be able to reach out through trusted sources of information, and we really are targeting three partner networks. One is youth, to reach out to this very unique population. It's critically important now during vaccine, because with the vaccine rollout of COVID-19, we're targeting populations that aren't usually targeted for vaccines. So it's a unique situation in that respect. We also are working through faith organizations as well, and working side by side with them. We've done some very exciting initiatives where we've co-written guidance together with faith organizations to better target their trusted constituents through these methods. And we work, of course, all over the world, so very, very different circumstances and different countries and communities as well. And we're also working through the business sector, because we've known from the past, as Henry indicated, through Edelman barometer trust that oftentimes people really trust information that are coming from their employer networks as well. So we've tried to work through those mechanisms as well. In terms of choice of vaccine, we're seeing that globally and also in Europe too, female population is often a little bit more hesitant than male population. So we're trying to kind of work around that issue as well. And yeah, I think at this point, we're beyond the global messaging on this. Everything has to become much, much more nuanced. And we're really targeting efforts around community engagement and empowerment, community-led initiatives to reach out to individuals, to have those individual conversations so that people can truly get their very valid questions answered through trusted networks. I mean, that can often be the healthcare providers as well.
Wonderful. And I want to turn to solutions in a moment, but first we have some research from Miroslava in a poll. So what proportion, can we bring up the poll actually so everyone can see it? There we go. So what proportion of the adult population across Central and Eastern Europe believe that COVID is a planned operation or conspiracy by the hidden forces and elites to control the population? If everyone could submit an answer, 8%, 18%, 28%, 38%. How long do we usually give for these polls of our precious time?
I think it's out there, yeah.
Oh, there we go, okay.
Okay, interesting. So I can say that people are a bit more optimistic than they should be.
Okay.
So it's not 18% across CEE, it's actually 28% across CEE. So it's fairly large proportion of the population. And the reason why we looked at this so-called pandemic conspiracy theory is because we wanted to, by observing what's going on social media, because pandemic and this kind of let's say what should be fringe conspiracy theories are not generally seen on mainstream media in most of the CE countries. So this is something that's definitely being perpetuated online. And we just wanted to kind of test the impact of the digital environment on the way we form our opinions about the pandemic. And obviously, again, this is an average number for whole CEE. So it's worse in some countries and better in some countries. But it just goes to show you the power that these types of conspiracy theories have. And it's quite also interesting that you see this perpetuation of disinformation narratives about COVID-19 globally. So whereas before, the digital revolution, conspiracy theories were always kind of part of our lives. Let's not pretend that it was ever any different. But what we see right now is this perpetuation of conspiracy theories, which are truly global. So something that Alex Jones from Infowars was adamantly, promoting in the US was professionally voiced over into Slovak, a very professional actor. Yes, very nicely sounding voiceover, and it was a video shared on Facebook, which was shared 16,000 times, which by Slovak standards is like extremely large number. And obviously, Facebook did, in cooperation with independent fact checkers, fact-checked this video, and it always came with this little disclaimer, that the information in this video is factually incorrect, but that didn't really stop the promotion of the video. And so then you see all these basically perpetuation of conspiracy theories from all kinds of, corners of the world, and they influence very specific local communities, which previously they wouldn't actually be able to reach. So I just wanted to also, by showing this poll, demonstrate the power of disinformation and the power of conspiracy theories, and obviously the issues that this poses to vaccination efforts and to just overcoming the pandemic.
And we have a question from the audience that's related. So someone, we have another question from the audience. Okay. We'll do the first question. So what are some of the dividing lines between those who are more and less prone to believing or to being disinformed and misinformed? We've talked about, a lot of the things that we're drawing in are these longer term challenges like trust in government, maybe educational gaps. And I'm wondering if, what we're learning now in the pandemic, where these dividing lines might fall.
That's a very good question. And again, it's not as easy as it seems. Like intuitively, we would say that, it's always people with lower education who believe in conspiracy theories more, or that it's people in rural areas, but this isn't always the case. So when we look at different countries, the picture is quite different, or sometimes it's the younger generation who is more prone than the older generation, which also seems kind of counterintuitive. So how we were talking, Melinda and Henry both quite correctly pointing out that strategic communication requires tailoring, that you need to tailor a specific message to the audience that you're targeting, because that will resonate. And in similar way, disinformation works too. So it's sort of like, the dark side of the information spectrum. So certain types of disinformation or certain types of conspiracy theories resonate among different sections of the population more. And we know many examples of this, and often, as Henry pointed out, they feed into pre-existing fears or even legitimate grievances. So, for example, the conspiracy theory that has been spread in the past about the HIV virus, that, there was a conspiracy theory that basically it has been invented, this has been spread by pro-Russian actors that this HIV virus was produced by the US. And so in some parts of Africa, these types of conspiracy theories can resonate for different reasons, or for example, conspiracy or disinformation about migration resonates strongly in Hungary because of, the current regime, because of the migration crisis that has been blown out of proportion. But when you look at disinformation about COVID-19 in Hungary, actually you will find that Hungary is one of the more resistant countries towards this type of misinformation. And you will see that other countries, such as in the Western Balkans or even in Slovakia, is much more receptive to these types of conspiracy theories. And yes, it has got to do a lot with trust in institutions or mistrust in government or in mainstream media. So it depends.
And one dividing line that Melinda brought up is the gender dividing line, which I didn't realize it sounds like it's a global issue, that women are more hesitant than men. And do we understand? Yeah, what do we understand about that?
I don't think we quite understand everything about that. And it's just a slight trend that we're seeing that I think is sort of surprising a lot of us. Potentially, maybe Henry knows more about the situation in the UK. But I do want to kind of bridge off of what Miroslava was saying in terms of this divide. And I think a lot of our gut reactions before this would have been, again, trust in government, trust in leaders. That's what we've sort of always known during an emergency. You can't build trust in the middle of an emergency. It has to be the foundation from which you start prior to an emergency. So if there was a foundation of maybe not even lack of trust in the government, but just maybe a bad experience with the public health system, that's going to affect people's perception on whether or not, responders have their best interests in mind, have the capability to manage this, can get their questions answered, and really understand the lives in which people are leading. And this is come into focus more now than ever. I mean, we've seen, countries that have never necessarily had to rely on community mechanisms for engagement strategies really have to do this now. And those mechanisms may not have been in place in some Western European countries or in higher income countries, and yet they really needed them during this response. Also, I think one of the trends we're starting to pick up is that individuals that rely on information through maybe more traditional media, maybe televised or written media, tend to not be so susceptible to disinformation because there's an opportunity to have more of a discourse in those types of media. So they can hear the pros, the cons, the arguments for and against, whereas potentially with social media, there's just little sort of snippets of information and not as much of a chance to sort of really dissect an issue. So we're beginning to see that kind of trend as well, so where people seek their information could really have a factor on whether or not they're susceptible to disinformation.
Great, and I have a question from the audience through the app. And by the way, if anyone in the room has questions, please feel free to go to the mic in the corner here. So one that I wanted to direct at Henry. How do you see the responsibility of vaccine producers and the medical establishment more widely for communicating to the public when governments are mistrusted?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And of course, vaccine producers tend to be global pharmaceutical companies. They have quite large marketing budgets. I think, it's in their interest to actually use that to promote the vaccine to patients and customers, and within that to identify exactly what kind of barriers there might be to promoting the vaccine to them. I think in doing that process, though, I think, and this is something not just for the vaccine producers, but for us more generally when we think about public health as a national priority, at the moment is the need to prioritize these different audiences. And the last question about dividing lines I thought was a very good one, because it really got to the heart of, well, what are the different motivations that people have, or the different reasons that people have for being hesitant, and so Melinda sort of picked out a really good range of them. And at one end you have people, yes, that believe in conspiracy theories. And that correlates with in our research looking at the UK, when we've tried to understand where disinformation lands and why it gets traction, we see that sort of the propensity to believe conspiracy theories actually correlates with the political extremes, and they're actually very hard audiences to win over. But there's a spectrum and a range. It's not that there is a line over which suddenly someone doesn't want the vaccine. There are a range of different reasons that people are hesitant, and in terms of reaching our goal in this instance, which is vaccinating as many of the population as possible in support of our pathway out of the pandemic, we need to prioritize those audiences and understand exactly how we can win over most of them, and recognize that some of them will be unreconcilable. I think generally when we've thought about disinformation in other contexts, when we, for example, in the wake of the Salisbury attack, when the UK was dealing with a disinformation attack from the Russian state, we recognized that there were some audiences in the UK for whom the Russian state's narrative about the events would always resonate, because they inherently believe in these kind of conspiracy theories. And the important thing was that those narratives didn't break into the mainstream and didn't start to influence, and they stay in these echo chambers at each end of the political spectrum. So recognizing which audiences we can actually inform and bring accurate information to, I think, is key. And of course, yes, the vaccine producers play a role in that.
That's a great point. And it's also such a dynamic environment. In the UK, you're changing the guidance in which, and I guess in every country, which vaccines are coming online, which are being used. I know in the US, the vaccine hesitancy has actually gotten better over time as more people are being vaccinated. And you talk to your friends and family and hear that maybe they didn't have a terrible experience and terrible side effects, and that increases your willingness to get the jab. So yeah, it's a highly dynamic and interesting and challenging environment. So we have a question here from the audience. Please introduce yourself and state the question as a question.
Hi, yes, good morning. I'm Anya Nussbaum. I'm a journalist for Bloomberg News. And I have a question about the need to reconcile the legitimate queries about the origin, the legitimate need to query about the origin of the virus, and the need to fight conspiracy theories. And what I mean is that last year, a lot of us were very quick to dismiss the thesis about the origin of the virus coming from Wuhan, accidental, non-accidental, doesn't matter. But a lot of us were very quick to dismiss that because it was a theory that was spread by Donald Trump, basically, and a certain part of the political spectrum. This year, this is being discussed again. You know, we're seeing more and more questions from scientists about the origin of the virus and whether or not these theories are true. How do you reconcile the need to investigate and the need not to dismiss certain theories and the need to also, you know, make sure that people don't go crazy over crazy theories?
That's a great question. Miroslava?
Yeah, absolutely great question. I think the issue always is when a legitimate question becomes politicized, because this is exactly what happened. You know, in the case of Donald Trump, it was so clear to everyone that there is an ulterior motive to this, and then it becomes really difficult to take this notion seriously. But I think the reconciling part comes when we, and this has been repeated so often during the pandemic that I'm not going to say anything new, but it's basically trusting the experts who are actually doing the research and giving them voice, which is not politicized, and giving them the floor and the space to speak authoritatively on some of these things. And also it's about not jumping to conclusions very quickly, because I think it's okay to tell to your audience that this is, you know, one hypothesis, and it's just one hypothesis which needs to be explored, which needs to be checked, and then needs to be proven true or wrong, essentially. But there's a big difference between when somebody just like throws around, you know, these notions without any kind of evidence. So I think it's about, and this sort of fits into a broader issue of how the media and how politicians and how public authorities communicate potentially very complex issues to public audiences in an understandable manner, essentially. And it's very difficult. So I understand, like, majority of stakeholders made some mistakes over the past, you know, 1.5 years in terms of communicating the pandemic, because the situation developed so rapidly that actually having safe knowledge of what is actually going on is being constantly changed and updated. But again, I think that needs to be communicated to the audiences as well, that, okay, this thing is new for all of us and we are still in the process of finding out. So if that is, you know, sort of communicated well, then I think the audiences are able to understand it. But people will always, you know, try to use these things for their political ends. So
I think from a journalist perspective, this intellectual humility too at the beginning of the pandemic to say, you know, there is tremendous uncertainty about the efficacy of face masks or about the origin of the virus, and to not be too quick to be reactionary as well. We only have 4.5 minutes left, and I did want to talk about solutions. So I'm curious, from your various perspectives, we're obviously living through these policy experiments all over the world, and whether you've seen particularly effective methods for combating disinformation and this longer term and more challenging project of building trust and education as well. Maybe we could start with Henry.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of different bits to that question, and I'll try not to take up all the time. But I think, I mean, quickly from our perspective, strategic communications is a key lever in promoting vaccine confidence. And you know, I touched earlier on on some of the things that make it effective. But in terms of particularly effective activity that we've seen and support, there's an app game called Go Viral, which was developed in partnership with the University of Cambridge, that uses behavioral insights to inoculate individuals against misinformation by having them play the part of someone that is spreading false information online in this simulation. And it's been proven that just one play of the game reduces the perceived reliability of fake news by an average of 21%, and their then immunity to false information lasts up to 3 months. So it's important to note that all of these behavioral interventions do have a sort of skill fade to the nudge that you've had with them. But yeah, we've translated that into multiple languages and shared it with multiple partners, and yeah, it's proven to have a behavioral impact on them. I think longer term, the important thing for us, and I think it's reflected by some of our allies, is thinking about 3 things, and it's stuff that's reflected in the UK's recent integrated review, which is a review of security and defence, but of course features health security more than previous reviews have, and all of our security priorities need to be based on building resilience, on sharing and promoting our values, and then finally, of course, on international cooperation with other nations and with multilateral organizations. And I think those are the things that will help us build trust. Those are the things that will help us through the pandemic, and those are the things that will help us build back better as the world.
And Melinda?
I'll echo some of what Henry said too. I think at least at the World Health Organization, we are looking at ways to help countries and communities become more resilient for the next pandemic or next emergency, because there will be one, unfortunately. Some of the things we're doing to help countries really begin to regain more of that trust factor before the next emergencies. We've started a new platform. It's a country-based tool called the Early AI-Supported Response with Social Listening. It enables countries to kind of pick up potential mis and disinformation in their own information ecosystem in their country. And it also allows them to triangulate other epidemiologic data to kind of really see what's going on in their own country. We're supporting that. We also have a research agenda for infodemics, so we can learn more about the impact of the infodemic, the spread of information and misinformation, and really to learn more about the tools and the mechanisms that we can employ that may help decrease the amount of misinformation, disinformation, and help to inoculate the population against that too. So these are some of the things we're looking forward to in the future.
And I guess the major theme here that we keep touching on is obviously this building trust in populations and down to the level of specific communities. So to wrap up, could we talk a little bit about what governments should be doing now to prepare for the next one? And this is, yes, there was an audience member who had a question along these lines in terms of communications. What should we be doing now to prepare the public for the next pandemic?
Mm-hmm. So this is a tough one for some governments. Obviously, the UK is doing really well. So I think it's always good to share best practice and learn from those who are really succeeding, you know, because there are plenty of countries also in CEE who are struggling with this part and who are not being trusted by their constituents because they are considered to have, you know, dealt with the second wave of the pandemic really poorly, as we have now. We all know that the CEE has been very badly affected by the second wave of the pandemic. So rebuilding trust in such an environment is extremely difficult. But I do believe that we've mentioned it already, efficient strategic communication is absolutely the key. But also, you know, it's about creating really modern campaigns, information campaigns, which could actually reach those who need to get vaccinated. And this has proven to be a problem in some countries. Obviously, the willingness to get vaccinated has increased, so that's the good news. And there are also large pockets of people who are undecided about vaccination. So across the EU, there's like 20% of the population. So if governments focus their efforts on actually these undecided constituents, then perhaps, you know, that's one way of overcoming, hopefully, this one pandemic. And in the long term, it's all about building efficient institutions, but that's obviously not something you can, you know, change within half a year or a year. That's definitely a long-term project.
And the other long-term project that I'm picking up on, we need to clone Henry or send him to, these different places to replicate the UK experience. No, that's really helpful. Was there anything that Henry and Melinda wanted to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, we do work internationally with a lot of our partners to help build strategic communications capability, and I think it's important to recognise that that the UK is very keen to make sure that we help as many of our partners as possible. And just on that great point about what prepares us for the next pandemic, I think the way we make our way out of this pandemic will build trust. We should do it in a way that means that we build trust, that means that the world will be more ready for the next one. And of course, sharing vaccines is going to be a key part of that. And that's why we were delighted that one of the outcomes of the G7 summit earlier this week was that the announcement of 1 billion vaccines to be donated to lower income countries. And it's that kind of display and symbolic gesture of our values that will ensure there is trust in the international system that that we will come out of this as a globe next time.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining online, on the app, in the audience, in Geneva, in London. And I think, yeah, it seems like there are no really easy solutions to this problem, and we need to start certainly thinking about the next one right now. So thank you for sharing all your insights, and thanks for joining today.
Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, great.